Good morning. Welcome to episode 94 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined by a very, very special guest. It is JP Acosta of SB Nation, formerly of Big Cat Country. And so JP is awesome because, first of all, he does amazing work breaking down the NFL and the NFL draft at SB Nation. But he's also one of just a handful of guys. I feel like it's basically JP, you and like Pete Prisco that actually like are a national guy that shines a decent amount of light on the Jaguars. So I definitely appreciate that. Appreciate all your work, and happy to have you here today to break down the NFL draft as it relates to the Jaguars. And so we're about 29 days out from the draft right now, if my math is right. So JP, welcome to the show, and how's draft season treating you so far?
It's going great. We're in the final stretch. It feels like we're rounding third base, and I'm ready for the draft to happen because we're getting into real silly season with all the this player's been going to this visit. This player's doing this visit. We're comparing guys to Mike Evans and Randy Moss. And it's like, all right, let's chill out a little bit. So I'm just ready for the draft to happen. I'm ready for the rubber to hit the road, and I'm ready to actually see where these guys end up going.
Yeah, I definitely got in that mode last week because in Jacksonville, like that rumor that like probably wasn't actually smoke, but it just happens to be draft season, was that Travis Hunter maybe could fall to the 5th overall pick. And so like once I saw that going around Jaguars Twitter, I was like, okay, I'm officially ready for like the draft to actually get here. But I guess while we're talking about it, I want your take. Do you think that there's any chance that Travis Hunter could fall to the 5th overall pick?
It's slim. It's a slim chance, but I think that there is still a chance,
Right.
It's a little murkier now with the Giants adding Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston to their QB room, but there's still a chance they take Shedeur Sanders. None of those guys are stopping me from still taking a quarterback if they want to. It feels like Cam Ward's going to go to the Titans at 1. 2, it feels like it's either going to be Abdul Carter or a quarterback. So what you're really hoping for, if you're a Jaguars fan, is for the Giants to take a quarterback. Because if the Giants take a quarterback, then it feels like the Patriots either choose between Travis Hunter or an offensive lineman. Again, and then there you're trying to figure out if they actually want to protect Drake May or go out and add a guy like Hunter. It's a slim chance he ends up at 5. I wouldn't count on it. It feels more like he actually did fall to 5 for us. Like that'd be great, but I'm not sure if he actually falls.
Yeah, my whole thing is that even if the Patriots decide that like they'd want to pass on Hunter, like I think that rather than taking a non-Hunter prospect at 4th overall, they would probably just trade down and let another team come up for the rights to draft Travis Hunter. And so I do agree with you that it's certainly a non-zero chance. That is kind of the gift and the curse of NFL draft season, is that technically anything is possible. But JP, I did want to bring you on to provide, again, expertise for the NFL draft, specifically to the Jaguars. I've been doing a mock draft each Monday on this show, but really after the first round, it's a little bit of a crapshoot for me. And so my question for you is, what are some player fits, specific prospect fits that you really like, not just in general, but specifically to be drafted in Jacksonville?
So I'm going to start on the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to start at receiver, and it feels like it's a guy that a lot of Jaguars fans really want on the team, and I'm going to go with TCU receiver Jack Besh. I think that he is such a McVay-coded receiver.
Yeah.
when you think about his build, he's like 6'1", 217, really stocky guy. He loves to get after in the run game as a blocker. He's more of a power slot receiver. He works after the catch. I think he's the best TCU receiver that they have. And when you think about his fit in the Liam Cohen offense and everything that they want to do with Brian Thomas Jr. in terms of moving him around the slot, getting him in different positions to win, I think having a guy like Jack Besh makes a lot of sense in terms of a guy who can do some of the blocking stuff in the slot. He can play a little bit on the outside. I also think a guy like Iowa State's Jaden Higgins makes sense if you really want to move Brian Thomas Jr. around a lot, because Higgins is a true outside receiver. He's a guy that can win on those end breakers, the glance routes, all the digs that you want to run with all the play action that Liam Cohen likes to do. And then that allows for Brian Thomas Jr. to be able to move around a little bit. So then you're playing matchup ball. On top of that, both of them are 6'4", and it's going to be really hard to defend 2 6'4" guys in Brian Thomas Jr. and Jaden Higgins, and then Gabe Davis, who is tall. Gabe Davis is tall.
He's tall, yes.
He is a tall person. I think another day 3 guy, if we're going to receiver, is Torrey Horton from Colorado State. Really struggled, had an injury, tore his ACL in 2024, but 2023 he showed really nice tape. In 2024, I think he showed that he's a little bit of a do-everything guy. He's not a true like difference maker, but I see him more as a really quality number 2 or number 3 guy. He can play on the outside, has a little bit of quick separation. I think that he can win at that point, at that level of the game where he's not a true like vertical threat, but he's more of an in-between guy.
Right.
Deep, but I think that that'd be a really nice ad for the Jaguars, especially at receiver. Flipping it to the defensive side of the ball, we're going to obviously start at defensive tackle. This defensive tackle class is loaded. There's so many guys you can just like throw a dart and you'll find a starting caliber defensive tackle. I'm going to go CJ West, defensive tackle from Indiana.
Okay.
Late in this draft, he played nose in Indiana's mint tight front at 6'1", 317, short arms. He's real sawed off, but he's got great lateral quickness, nice leverage that he uses. Not a pass rusher. So you're kind of struggling there with Devon Hamilton still on the roster, who's more of a run defender, not a pass rusher. If you're looking for a true 1 technique because of the growth of Mason Smith as a true 3 tech, then I think CJ West can be a really good ad there. If you want to add another 3 tech, I think Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee is a really nice fit. He's a little smaller. I think he's like maybe 280 pounds, but his lateral quickness, his burst, his ability to get up the field in a hurry as a pass rusher is going to be huge. You can rotate him in on passing downs, and he's going to be a guy that goes on day 2 for even front teams like the Jaguars who just want to get vertical push. You just want to get somebody who can get upfield in a hurry. I think another guy that makes a lot of sense is Tyleik Williams from Ohio State. Day 2 guy, one of, if not the best run defending defensive tackle in this class. He's a glass eater in the run game. He wants to hold up blocks. He can get off. He has this really nice dead leg technique where he'll drop his knee on a double team and then he'll just slip right under. It's so cool.
Yeah.
If you want somebody who can play the run really well and again allow Mason Smith to grow as a 3 tech, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then I really like Azaria Thomas, Florida State cornerback.
Right.
I know it'll be really weird what happens at corner with this team, especially with Jordan Lewis playing the slot, Jerry and Jones moving outside. But Azaria Thomas has the length that they want. I think that makes a lot of sense there. Andrew Makuba, safety from Texas, who is a little bit on the lighter side. He'll miss some tackles because he's out of control, but his range on the back end really makes a lot of sense, especially with losing Andre Cisco. With losing Cisco, you lose a little bit of that range on the back end. He's a really great athlete at safety, and you can really move him around a lot. And then if we're going to edge, I think Josiah Stewart's really cool. I just think he's a cool player because he's like 6 feet, 240, but he's actually a better run defender than he is a pass rusher, which is so hilarious to me. He's super strong as a run defender. He's got a little bit, he doesn't really bend as a pass rusher. He's more just really fast. So he can get to the spot before the quarterback does. But if you're looking for a guy who can immediately turn up the juice on pass rush downs, you allow your guys up front to be a little bit more versatile. You can move Trayvon Walker inside. I think that makes a lot of sense. Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss, formerly at Florida. A lot of Gator fans might know him very well.
Yep.
Bonafide pass rusher. It is not the pass rush that I'm worried about with Umanmielen, but if you want somebody who can be sort of that designated pass rusher that they've really been missing since Josh Hines Allen came onto the team, it's really going to be Umanmielen. I think Barron Sorrell on day 3 makes a lot of sense in terms of the athletic profile that you're looking for. But those are a few of the guys that I'm really kind of keeping my eye on as the Jaguars get through their draft process. Also, RJ Harvey, running back from UCF, he just makes so much sense for this offense in terms of tackle breaking, explosiveness. Probably reminds you a little bit of Bucky Irving, but I think he's faster than Bucky Irving. So I'm curious what they do at that running back spot, and then you could really throw a dart at a tight end like defensive tackle class, and you'll find a starter. I like Terrence Ferguson for this team from Oregon. Mitchell Evans, I think from Notre Dame, is going to be a better pro than he is a college player. Was really good in 2023, led the Irish in receiving yards towards ACL, but I think that he's going to be a really good in between receiver for an offense, but also block his butt off.
Gotcha. Wow. Okay. So you gave a lot of great stuff. So let's start with receivers because Jaden Higgins and Jack. I was always pronouncing it Jack Beck, but it's Jack Besh.
Yeah, Besh.
Besh. Okay. So Jack Besh, I think seems to be the consensus best wide receiver fit in Jacksonville because he gets not just Cooper Kupp comps, but more so Puka Nacua comps. But as you said, definitely seems like the perfect guy for McVay offense given his versatility. I'm glad that you actually talked about how much he can be moved around because I think that listeners of the show might be tired of me using versatility as a buzzword, but I do think that it's something that the coaching staff on both sides of the ball is really going to want. And so Jack Beck can certainly run routes from the perimeter, but also line up in line as a pseudo tight end and kind of help with chipping and blocking on that front. And so the versatility, the toughness, all of those intangibles are definitely going to stand out to the Jaguars. And then if they take Jack Beck, would you imagine that he would be kind of the guy that's more so going in motion, and then Brian Thomas would be kind of the X and more so just stuck on the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, I think he would be Brian Thomas Jr. would be the X that you can move in situations, but right. I think Besh is going to be at his best when he's the Z. He's the one doing all the movement stuff, the power slot, like how the Rams use Puka Nacua in terms of he's able to dig guys out on duo, which Liam Cohen loved to run in Tampa Bay. He's going to be doing a lot of the movement stuff. I think a lot of what Chris Godwin was for Tampa, you can kind of see what Jack Besh can do in that role in Jacksonville, along with Brian Thomas Jr.
Right. So for Jaden Higgins, I feel like he's a little bit of the inverse. For certainly, he also has versatility, can run outside the slot, is maybe not as good of a blocker as Besh, but still a solid blocker for a receiver. So if the Jags drafted Jaden Higgins instead, would you expect him to be more of the X receiver who still moves around a little bit, but is more so kind of tied on the line of scrimmage, which would allow Brian Thomas to be more of the mover? And what do you think would be best for Brian Thomas?
I think in that case with Higgins, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the one doing a lot more of the movement. Not to say that Jaden Higgins can't do that, but Higgins' best routes, his most of his catches at Iowa State came as the X on glances, on posts, on slants, all in breakers. If you think about, and I'm not saying this is a one-to-one prospect comparison. This is not a one-to-one prospect comparison. It is basically just how they're used at the next level. I think with a lot of what Nico Collins does for Houston, with all the digs, all the in breakers, all the slants, that's what Jaden Higgins did at Iowa State. So I want him to be more of that guy because something that he's not really good at is the throttling down coming backwards. He's not going to run a lot of curls. He's not going to run a lot of comebacks, but Brian Thomas Jr. can do that. You can be the one to move around and create matchup ball with him. So in that case, I think you go out and move Brian Thomas Jr. around, but I also think you go out and add another tight end. So you play a little bit more 12 because neither of those guys, I think Higgins is a fine blocker, but with him as the X, you're going to want somebody who can dig these guys out on duo. You're going to want somebody who can be more of a blocker. So I think they go out and add another tight end, which they're probably going to do anyway.
Yeah, and they do already have 3 tight ends. They have Brenton Strange, obviously. After cutting Evan Ingram, they signed 2 tight ends in free agency. I think that, I'm still expecting them to draft a tight end and potentially carry 4 tight ends because of what you just said in terms of, scheme implications. But also, we saw last year that Liam Cohen's Buccaneers carried 4 tight ends. So I think it's definitely a possibility, if not a probability. So what I'm kind of hearing or, assuming, I guess, is that Jack Besh to me sounds like a perfect fit for the scheme, but Jaden Higgins maybe more so seems like the perfect fit for Trevor Lawrence because he's not maybe necessarily a contested catch monster like a Ted McMillan or a T Higgins, something like that, but he is good at contested catches. And what you said about all those in-breaking routes going over the middle of the field, I think is definitely something that could help Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars offense in general because the middle of the field is just an area that they did not target a lot under the Doug Peterson regime. And I don't know if that's like how much of that is like to make Trevor Lawrence comfortable, or because of like the lacking personnel, or because it was like a press Taylor Doug Peterson's thing. But I think they certainly could and should target the middle of the field more often. So I feel like Jaden Higgins would be really ideal for that.
Yeah, I think with Higgins, you're going to get a lot more middle of the field stuff. You're going to let Brian Thomas Jr. Be a little bit more vertical. Of course, he can do everything, but you're going to allow him to play from the slot. You're going to allow him to truly be a little bit like how, when Justin Jefferson blew up in Minnesota, it was because Kevin O'Connell was moving him around and getting him in favorable positions via motion, stacks, bunches. And you think of something like that for Brian Thomas Jr. and you think of Jaden Higgins. With Jack Bech, you still can do that, but I think he's going to spend a lot more time as the X rather than the movement guy than the Z, because that's what Bech will do.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to defensive tackles. Definitely loved the shout for Omar Norman-Lott, who's been on my radar for a while as like a potential option for the Jaguars if they don't draft Mason Graham with the 5th overall pick, or just in the first round in general. Because the thing is, like, typically you can never find interior pass rushers. That was like a big reason that the Jaguars spent a 2nd round pick on Mason Smith last year, is that even though it caught a lot of people both in and outside of Jacksonville by surprise, it's like that type of pass rush upside just like is rarely available outside of the 1st round. But I think this year, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this year is a little bit different, where like there's guys like Omar Norman-Lott, guys like Deon Walker that actually can provide more pass rush juice relative to other defensive tackle classes. And so with all that said, like, where do you land on Mason Graham? Do you think that he's such like a high floor, can't miss prospect that you would love the Jags to get him? Or do you think that like you would like the Jaguars to get him, but you won't be sweating if they don't because of like the defensive tackle class after him? Where do you fall on that?
With how James Gladstone has talked about the defensive line and how they've approached the draft in LA recently, I think Mason Graham be a home run pick for the Jaguars. I think when it comes to the pedigree that they look for, when it comes to just the high floor, like you said, I think Graham, he weighed in at 296 at the combine, but I'm not worried about that because he was obviously trying to run fast. I think combine weight is a little weird. Don't take it too much into effect because those guys are trying to run really fast. I think he weighed more around 308, 315 at Michigan, and you can see the power despite having the shorter arms, former wrestler. He knows how to win with leverage, and that's something that you really can't teach. I think having length, sorry to Trent Baalke, not really sorry, but I think having length as defensive tackle might be a little bit overrated. It's more about how you use it. And Mason Graham used his lack of length in a really strong way with his quickness, ability to get off the ball. I think you play him as a 3. I think you play him as a 1 tech possibly, but I think he is the perfect cut and dry 3 tech for a team like the Jaguars who can affect the run and the pass, because he's able to get vertical. I think he's got a nice set of counters to all of his go-to moves. And it just makes too much sense for a guy like Graham to come on this team when you think about drafting Braden Fisk last year and what Braden Fisk did in LA for the Rams with James Gladstone. And then you think about drafting a guy like Jared Verse round 1, who was an older prospect, had some flaws, but it made sense for that team to establish themselves up front on the defensive line. And so that's where I think this team is going to go, especially with how James Gladstone has talked about approaching the defensive line, approaching building the trenches.
For sure. Yeah, I feel like it's might almost be like a positive that he has short arms, or maybe not a positive, but like less of a negative, because I'm thinking about this. But like if you have short arms, or if you're just like not an absolute freak athlete, like you can't like rely on your long arms or like your traits and stuff like that. You got to be able to like find other ways to win. Obviously, he did that. He's been one of, if not the most productive defensive tackles in college football for the past few years. And so let's say there's a scenario where there's only one quarterback taken in the top 4. So let's say Cam Ward is taken first, and then Abdul Carter is taken second, Travis Hunter is taken third, and Mason Graham is taken 4th. Who are you taking? And on top of that, or just, yeah, go ahead and answer that one, and then I've got a follow-up.
Oh, man. This is the nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
You're hoping in this scenario that somebody gets angsty and wants to trade up for Shedeur Sanders. That's the hope. You want to try and get out of the 5th pick as fast as possible. I think you might be able to work a trade with a team like the Saints, who might want a quarterback, especially after this season with Derek Carr's contract looking the way it is. Maybe you could try and trade back, and in a trade back scenario, I could understand drafting a guy like Tedero McMillan. I could see them going after a guy like Derek Harmon as well. If you're looking for another defensive tackle who can play the 1, also can play the 3. He's a little bit more movement versatile. Really, really long arms. And he's just got this super strong upper body that makes him such a massive factor in the run game that you can play him as a 1 tech and then allow Mason Smith to grow as your 3 tech pass rusher, which I'm not sure what this front office and coaching staff thinks of Mason Smith, given he wasn't their draft pick, but he had flashes last season. So I think it's only right to build off of that. But in a scenario where there's no trade backs, nobody wants to trade up with you, you're at 5. I wouldn't mind if they looked at Ashton Jeanty or Tyler Warren at 5. I don't know what. I feel like the Travis Etienne era in Jacksonville might be coming to an end. It feels like Tank Bigsby kind of took a little bit of the luster, a little bit of the shine last season. And despite having Etienne and Bigsby, I wonder what the team thinks of him. They didn't really give him I'm not sure if they didn't give him the 5th-year option despite being a first-round pick. So you wonder what's going to happen with Etienne after this season. Jeanty obviously is my 3rd-ranked player on my top 50 big board. Just a phenomenal player. I think what goes underrated about him is his pass catching ability. He didn't have to do it in 2024 because he was running everybody over. But in 2023, he led all running backs in yards per route run. So he can do the pass catching stuff. He can be a good pass blocker. I think with all the gap scheme stuff that you run, having 2 tackle breakers like Tank Bigsby and Ashton Jeanty in the backfield will make a lot of sense. Depending on what they think of Travis Etienne, I could also see this being a Tyler Warren spot. And you think about the stuff that they like that you want to do with your tight ends and be a little bit more versatile. I don't think Liam Cohen has called plays for a player as good as Tyler Warren like ever. I think you have to go back a long time. Warren is such a unicorn prospect where he's a really good blocker. I think he can win with his catch radius and just a little bit of the explosiveness in the middle of the field, and then he wins after the catch. You think about what Liam Cohen's Bucks love to do. You want to win after the catch, and instead of having Jack Besh be your movement power slot guy, that's Tyler Warren. Or if you want a receiver to be a power slot guy, that's Tyler Warren. That's what he can do. So I would understand if they took a guy like Jeanty or Warren there. I don't know if I can really get on board. I can get on board with an offensive lineman at 5, but it would just be really weird considering Walker Little just got an extension. Of course, not this front office, but nothing from this front office has seemed like they want to go away from Walker Little. But, in this scenario, you have Armand Membu, who's fallen to 5. You have Will Campbell, who has also fallen. I could see them, again, with how much they want to build up the trenches. Do you want to take a Will Campbell who might be a tackle, might be a guard, but is good, like is just generally a good prospect? Do you want to take a guy like him and then make Walker Little your swing tackle? It'd be an expensive swing tackle, but you get the best 5 out there. Or do you want a guy like Membu, who is an incredible athlete, was really good in wide zone, especially at Missouri, which is all they ran is outside zone. But with Liam Cohen's offense going in a different direction with power, with counter, would that be the best fit? So I'm not sure they go offensive line, especially if Graham is off the board. But my first priority would be to try and call the Raiders or the Saints and be like, hey, the quarterback's there if you want him. We don't need him. So I would try and trade back But if not, I could see one of those offensive skill players coming off the board early.
That'd be really interesting. Especially because I feel like obviously George Kittle is in the Kyle Shanahan offense in San Francisco, but I feel like the McVay tree typically doesn't have like great tight ends. Like TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota is the best one I can think of off the top of my head. Usually like they do want someone who can like both block, but then also like thinking of Tyler Higbee in Los Angeles, like be available for like screen game and like short yardage stuff. Even K. Dotton last year with the Buccaneers. And so it'll be interesting to see like how high they do draft a tight end, because I think even though they have 3 tight ends on the roster, as we said before, I expect them to draft a 4th. Whether it's that high would be really interesting. But I like, as you were kind of saying, I think Warren provides the versatility that we've been talking about perhaps more than anyone else. I'm curious. One thing that's been floating around my head this past week, because it is the time of the year when like we just want the draft to get here and I have too much time to think about certain hypotheticals. But if the Jaguars pulled a 2022 and they drafted like an edge rusher out of nowhere, like Trayvon Walker in 2022, I'm trying to think of like who would be the most likely edge rusher that the Jaguars could fall in love with. Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall, just had a really good pro day to kind of back up his athleticism, which is important considering he played at a lower competition level. But I think there's also off the field concerns there, and I don't know if the Jaguars would be interested in that. And then Shamar Stewart, I know, has a lot of fans. Michael Williams, I know, has a lot of really big fans. Jalen Walker has been mocked to the Jaguars by Daniel Jeremiah. And so is there any edge rushers after Abdul Carter that interest you for the Jaguars somewhere in the top 10, or do you think that they are best filling that need later in the draft?
I freaking love Shamar Stewart. I know the production isn't there, but when you watch his tape and when you watch him play, he looks like he absolutely can be a double-digit sack guy in the NFL with the speed and the burst. And you think about the guys who have translated immediately in the NFL, they're able to win with speed to power. We talked about Jared Verse, who just won Defensive Rookie of the Year, going speed to power. Will Anderson with speed to power all through the first 2 seasons in the NFL. And so I think a guy like Shamar Stewart can win. It's just about finishing plays for him. And something that I'm trying to keep into account when looking at these edge rushers is what Anthony Campanile comes from. In Green Bay, they had huge edge rushers. They are monsters. But those guys weren't necessarily the best in terms of true pass rush, in terms of bend. So I'm curious what he wants in his pass rushers. But he did coach Edgerrin Cooper last season, who was a freak of nature, who could rush the passer and play off the ball. I'm not sure what's going to happen at the linebacker spot. I don't know what their plan is off ball. I think Devin Lloyd has kind of assumed that spot as the second linebacker, going to be the first linebacker after Foye ends up leaving. Ventrell Miller played really well, so you kind of create a log jam. So I'm curious where Jalen Walker would play in this scenario.
Right.
I think that also takes out a guy like Jihad Campbell from Alabama, who is a better off-ball linebacker, but you're kind of like you're creating a logjam at linebacker. I think Michael Williams makes a lot of sense. In a trade back scenario, I could see Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. Just a blur of a pass rusher. I think he is in the same vein as Mike Green. I think Mike Green might be more explosive, but Ezeraku is longer. I think he's better in the run game. And I honestly think that he might end up being the better pro, depending on where he ends up falling. But I could see a guy like Ezeraku if they fall. It's just really weird to pick another edge rusher at 5, considering you have spent so much money and investment in your top 2 edge rushers, that drafting a guy just to be a sub-package rusher at 5 feels like a little bit, it just feels odd, like if you're picking a guy at 5, you're expecting him to play a large majority of the snaps, but he won't with Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen on the edge. So I would see the vision, but I don't know if I would fully get on board.
Yeah, I guess my main just thought is that edge rusher is obviously such a premium position, and the Jaguars need pass rushers in general, even if they do have 2 starters at end. But yeah, it would be surprised, even if I guess they wouldn't turn down Abdul Carter, but I don't know, even if like they traded back and still passed on like pass rushers, that wouldn't be a surprise because if they did take a pass rusher or specifically an edge rusher in the first round, that probably wouldn't be great news for what the current regime thinks of Trayvon Walker. But I also like have no reason to think that they wouldn't be pleased with Walker's performance both on and off the field in the past couple of years. And so, yeah, wouldn't expect it to be an edge rusher, but that's just the one kind of sleeper position that I kind of had in mind.
I think another sleeper position potentially maybe safety.
Mm.
I think Nick Emenwari is a fantastic athlete, obviously. A little bit more, I think he's better coming downhill. So again, you're kind of log jam in the slot again. But you know, if you want somebody that can play on the roof, if you want somebody to be a little bit more matchup versatile, if again, with Anthony Campanile coming from Green Bay, Xavier McKinney changed that defense with his versatility. Malachi Starks makes a lot of sense in a trade back scenario, especially if Mason Graham is off the board. I get the signing of Eric Murray. It's kind of like, but we have Eric Murray. No, you if you still can pick a guy like Starks who can flip this defense and give them more juice on the back end and more versatility because of how much with Jeff Hafley, it might be different with Anthony Campanile, but with Jeff Hafley in Green Bay, they did so much spinning in the cover two. They played a lot of inverted Tampa 2 with the safety, Xavier McKinney, being sort of the middle runner. That seems like stuff Malachi Starks can do with his instincts, the ball skills. He played a lot more in the slot at Georgia this year and didn't really miss a step. I think Malachi Starks would be perfect for this team, especially in a trade back scenario. But I could also see them falling in love with Nick Emenwari, who is a phenomenal athlete, can play on the back end, but I like him moving forward a little bit more.
Yeah, I remember banging the drum for Brian Branch. I guess that was 2 draft classes ago, just because I feel like the Jaguars have been lacking a like middle of the field playmaker on its defense for really as long as I can remember, at least like since the Jacksonville years. And so I feel like Malachi Starks potentially in the second round, or maybe moving back in the first round and grabbing Emenwari from South Carolina would make a lot of sense because, yeah, like technically they strengthened the spine with both like the spine of the defense by signing both Eric Murray from Houston and Jordan Lewis, the slot corner from Dallas. But I think Jordan Lewis can be a playmaker, but like certainly you want someone to generate turnovers and generate negative plays from that spot. And so I feel like that was kind of sort of supposed to be Andre Cisco for whatever reason, whether it's injuries or whatever else, didn't pan out in Jacksonville. But I still think that's an area of need for the team. And so similar to tight end, similar to running back, similar to pretty much everyone else, it'll be really interesting to see where the Jaguars like kind of take their swings for each position group. I think that as you brought like a really good lingering question that we have entering the draft is like, what do the Jaguars want in terms of body type for their edge rushers? Are they going to be like what Green Bay was last year, where they want only like Hulk beings and like are not interested in all designated pass rushers? Or maybe they are interested in just getting any kind of pass rush juice that they can. And so to wrap up, my final question for you, JP, is like, do you have any other lingering questions for the Jaguars, whether in the upcoming drafts or even just in the 2025 season and beyond?
What's the plan at wide receiver? With all of the skill position moves that they made in terms of cutting Evan Ingram and trading Christian Kirk, it kind of creates this massive void in production along the skill positions. And Johnny Munt is more of a tight end 3. When I asked my friend Tyler Fortis, who covered the Vikings, the first thing he told me about Johnny Munt was he's the people's tight end 3. He's not making an impact as a receiver in that spot. But with Liam Cohen's offense in Tampa, the tight ends weren't really impact players. You know, with Grant Udinski coming from Minnesota, obviously TJ Hawkinson made a difference. But I wonder how they approach the skill positions in this draft. Again, in the scenario where Mason Graham is gone and they try and trade back, I think Teteroa McMillan makes a lot of sense. I think Chris Olave would be the perfect fit for not Chris Olave. Whoa!
Not Olave. You just broke my brain for a second. The Saints trade up from 9. They include Chris Olave.
You know what? If they wanted to do that, I'd sign off on that immediately.
That'd be amazing.
I helmet scouted like crazy there. Emeka Egbuka.
Gotcha.
Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, who also wore number 2 and had the same helmet as Chris Olave.
Yeah.
Makes so much sense for this team. in terms of what they want as the movement guy, in terms of the power slot that could be the true second receiver next to Brian Thomas Jr. Makes a lot of sense. Matthew Golden's been getting a lot of steam from Texas. I really like his body control despite his size and the ability to go up and get these vertical passes, kind of be above a rim at 6 feet. I think that makes a lot of sense for this team. But I'm really just curious how they approach the skill position room and what they do to surround Brian Thomas Jr. with the proper tools to help him succeed if they want to move him around the slot, like they said. And I think that's a really, really telling thing. So if they want to be able to move him around a lot, I could see them going for an outside receiver, like a true X in this scenario, or someone that can win on the outside instead of more of a slot only guy, because you want to move Brian Thomas Jr. around a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because the Jaguars certainly have a luxury by having not only Brian Thomas Jr., a guy who's a bona fide number one receiver, not just a field stretcher, but also a field tilter. Defenses have to not just back up a little bit, or at least not play so far up, but also defenses are dictating coverages over to the side that Brian is on. So it's amazing to have that. It's obviously amazing to have Trevor Lawrence, a guy that can make any throw at any level of the field. But at the same time, those guys will certainly elevate the people and the players around them, but you still want players and people to elevate them as well and to help them grow, especially considering that they're both 22 and 25 years old respectively. And so I think that's a great point where even if they do have QB1 and wide receiver 1 on the roster, that doesn't mean that you can't continue adding to the ecosystem. But I do expect that to be the result, especially considering the new head coach of the football team is such an offensive-minded guy, obviously. But that'll do it for today's show. JP, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. Definitely learned a lot. Do you want to plug your stuff for the people? Tell them where they can find you.
Of course, I'm the football writer, NFL draft writer at SB Nation. I do a lot of mock drafts. I do big boards. Lot more in-depth scouting reports. Just dropped one on Cam Ward. I got one coming up on Harold Fannin Jr., who also is a bit more of a receiver. Could make sense for the Jaguars, depending on what you like as a tight end. But I have a longer piece on Harold Fannin Jr. coming out. And just overall, just follow me on social media. See what I'm doing, see what I'm going. I'm posting a lot of clips. So just follow me there.
Yeah, absolutely. Do that, everyone. JP's a certified ball knower. Thanks again, JP, for coming on. I'll be back tomorrow at 9:04 a.m. Eastern with Mia O'Brien. So thank you to everyone for watching and listening. And Chris Olave, welcome to Jacksonville. See you guys next time.